There are a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh events happening this weekend. So we have two YCSs, one in North America and one in Europe, as well as a whole bunch of regional qualifiers. So a lot of people are going to be playing Yu-Gi-Oh this weekend. And that's really exciting, but it's also pretty scary, right? If you're someone that's going to an event and you're trying to get that first invite or that first top, there are a lot of decks out there, a lot of cards out there that you really need to keep in mind when you're building your own strategies and playing against people at those tournaments. In today's video, I'm going to talk about 5 cards, and these 5 cards are a little bit weird, right? Because these 5 cards are currently topping, but I feel like they might be better than people are giving them credit for. And I want to make that distinction here because these aren't super underrated cards. I still feel people rate them properly. They know that they're powerful, but they're cards that maybe people aren't playing nearly as much as I feel that they should be being played. And I say that because these cards are all extremely good against current top strategies, and I feel like they could be played even more than they already are. If you'd like to purchase any of the cards that I'm talking about in today's video, please use my link to tcgplayer.com. It'll be in the description below. When you use that link to buy these cards or any other Yu-Gi-Oh cards or Magic cards or Pokemon cards, part of that sale, a portion of it, goes right back into my channel, which I really appreciate when you use that link because I don't have a Patreon, I don't have anything like that. So that is just one easy way you can support me without spending any extra money because you're already trying to buy cards for the decks that you want to play. Anyway, the first card is Mind Control, a normal spell card, and this card is currently very popular in the Going Second Orcus build, and it has popped up in a few other decks. We've seen it in a few just regular Orcus decks, we've seen it in a couple Salamangreat deck lists, and overall, I just feel this card is so good right now. Mind Control is very, very good at baiting those negations. So when you go second with this card, you can use it to break builds. Its effect says, just in case you don't already know it, target one monster your opponent controls until the end phase, take control of that target, but it cannot declare an attack or be tributed. The obvious thing that you're trying to do with Mind Control, other than just bait your opponent's negations, is steal monsters that you want to use for link materials. For example, you could steal an opponent's Galatea and then make your own Dingirsu over top of it. You could steal your opponent's Link 2 monster and then make a Link 3 or a Link 4 monster. Mind Control can be used in a ton of different ways, but like I said, what's really cool about this card right now in particular is that it does bait negations. For example, in the standard Orcus ending board, they're only going to have one Orcus Link monster on the board. It's probably Longirsu, maybe a Galatea, depending on how their combo actually turned out. So if they want to use that Orcus Crescendo to negate one of your cards, they have to have that Link monster on the field. However, Mind Control just forces them immediately to have to use that Crescendo, because if they let you take their Link monster, which I guess could happen if they don't really understand what's going on, but in most cases they won't want that to happen and they'll just negate the Mind Control with the Crescendo. Well, now your Mind Control just stopped your opponent's one negation, because Orcus is a deck that very commonly doesn't end with other forms of interruption. Sure, they might have a hand trap, they might have a Call by the Grave set if you didn't bait that out on their turn, but overall the Crescendo is really their one negation, their one all-encompassing negation, and you just took it out with the Mind Control. Very, very good, because that means that for the most part, outside of your opponent's unsearchable cards like hand traps and Call by the Grave, your combos are now going to go uninterrupted. What this means though, as a player, if you're going first, you really do have to be prepared for your opponent to be playing a card like Mind Control, especially if they're playing Orcus or Salamangreats where the card is most commonly found. But even plenty of other decks are playing Mind Control right now as a tech option in their side decks, especially any deck that wants to go second in games 2 or 3. So when you go first and make your board, you really want to make sure that you're being weary of Mind Control because so many people are playing it right now. Next up, we have a promo card from the 2019 Megatons, but probably neither of the promo cards that you think it would be, because a lot of discussion is currently on Nibiru and Dark Ruler no more, but not a lot of discussion is being had about Dimension Shifter. And that's perfectly fine, because yes, this card probably isn't as impactful as those other two cards, but it is really strong, especially in the Orcus matchup. So this card actually has seen a little bit of success already. It recently saw success in the main deck as a 3 of in a top 16 PPG event. It was in a pure Thunder Dragon list, and that makes a lot of sense there, because part of the problem with this card, part of the tricky part, is that it does affect you as well. So what does this thing say? Well, it is a level 6 monster, a spellcaster monster. It has 1200 attack and 2200 defense. That part doesn't really matter because you're mostly just using it as a hand trap, and it says if you have no cards in your graveyard as a quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard until the end of the next turn. Any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. So I know on paper it might look like this card is only good going second, because very similar to No Material, which requires you have no monster cards, people usually think of this as like, oh, if I have no cards in my graveyard, the only time it's ever going to happen is going second. However, when you go first with a deck like Thunder Dragons, very often you actually can make a Colossus and then take the last Thunder Dragon out of your graveyard and have no monsters, so that you can now use Dimension Shifter. And from the deck profile, it sounded like the player actually did do that a few times. Where Dimension Shifter really comes in handy though is that it does just sort of blank your opponent's turn if they have a lot of graveyard effects. I know we think about Artifact Lancia in that way, but one of the things that sometimes happens with Artifact Lancia is that your opponent can still make a half decent board, and now they have all these cards in the graveyard that you have to deal with on the next turn. However, in the case of Dimension Shifter, your opponent just skips their entire turn for the most part. You probably wouldn't want to play this card in a non-aggressive deck because you really want to be able to take advantage of your opponent skipping their turn. I know that sounds like an easy thing to do, but if you're playing a slower deck like Altergeist or Guru Control, you probably wouldn't be able to take advantage of skipping your opponent's turn as often as a deck like Pure Thunder Dragons. So you really want to make sure you're playing this in an aggressive deck like Pure Thunder Dragons, and I think that what's really cool about that interaction is that cards like Batteryman Solar actually get even better once you've resolved this card because it banishes the cards instead of sending them to the graveyard, automatically triggering those Thunder Dragon effects. Next up, we have a card I feel like I've talked about in a lot of these types of videos, and that is Cosmic Cyclone. So despite me talking about this card a lot, it's not the most popular card right now. I mean, a lot of people are still playing Twin Twisters, but this card definitely is catching on. There are people playing it, even in their main deck, and for a good reason. So like I was talking about earlier with the Orcus ending board only really having that one form of interruption, usually just the crescendo, Cosmic Cyclone is a card that can immediately force your opponent to negate it. It's a little bit different than Mind Control because it can't actually deal with monster cards, but Mind Control isn't strictly better than Cosmic Cyclone, because if it was, I wouldn't be talking about Cosmic in this video. Cosmic actually has two pretty big advantages over Mind Control that you want to consider if you're trying to put it into your deck. The first big advantage is that Mind Control is only good going second, but Cosmic Cyclone can be set as a quick play spell card going first, sort of adding another layer of interruption to your already opening boards. And while that is pretty cool, I think the bigger advantage of playing something like Cosmic Cyclone instead of Mind Control, especially in your main deck, is that it's actually pretty viable against a variety of decks, not just combo decks. Because while Mind Control is very good against the big boards that end on a lot of monster cards, Cosmic is a lot better against decks like Subterrors and Altergeist and True Dracos. You can save it for those pesky floodgates that you don't want to deal with, and I think that is a huge advantage over Mind Control in certain matchups. What you want to do when considering playing either Cosmic Cyclone or Mind Control is look at what your deck has bad matchups against, and also sort of do a metagame analysis and say, okay, maybe if I'm going to a regional qualifier, there'll be more back row decks than there are combo decks, so I want to play Cosmic Cyclone, but maybe at a bigger event, more combo decks are around, so I want to play Mind Control. I don't have the answer for you on which card is better for your particular strategy, and it is going to change from event to event depending on how the metagame shifts, but overall, just some things to consider when you're thinking about those two cards. The next card is Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha, and this card is seeing play in going second Orcus decks as a staple 3 of, but I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface of how good this card is. This card, to me at least, really does seem comparable to Prankatops, a card that is seeing widespread use in a variety of decks. This card does require a little bit more setup, and its effect is a little bit different, but I think they fill very similar roles, and I'm surprised more people haven't tried this card out in just generic ways. So what does this thing do? Well, first off, it special summons itself for free if you control no effect monsters. Please keep in mind, if you control no monsters at all, that's one of the times that you can special summon this. You don't really have to be playing like non-effect monsters to take advantage of this effect. And then it says you can banish this card from your hand or your graveyard to target one card your opponent controls and return it to the hand. How do these two effects sort of go together? Well, they go together because there is a Link 1 non-effect monster Tenyi, which is really cool, really easy to summon. So you special summon this card from your hand, you use it for a Link 1, and then you can banish it from the graveyard to bounce a card that your opponent controls. This card does operate very similar to Prankatops because you are just using a card from your hand, a free special summon, to remove a card on your opponent's side of the field. But I think in some situations, bouncing cards is better than destroying them. There are tons of cards out there with destruction prevention effects like Dingirsu, like Colossus, and this thing can just bounce those back to your opponent's extra deck, and that is really, really valuable against certain matchups. This card is also very good against cards like Solemn Strike because it forces your opponent to use the Solemn Strike on the Tenyi Link monster unless they want it to maybe get bounced, and I can tell you just from the past couple weekends of experience playing Altergeist, this is one of the most annoying cards to play against just as a back row strategy because it can just bounce stuff back to your hand, and that really puts you far behind because the traps obviously have to wait a turn to be used. So by bouncing a trap card back to your opponent's hand, you're putting them behind multiple turns because they can't immediately use them when their next turn comes around. While this card is seen play in going second Orcus and a few other combo decks, I really feel like it's being underutilized. I feel like more players could use this thing because it is just so good against back row decks and just ripping through your opponent's cards. One of the things that this thing does, not only just bouncing cards, but also it gives you a Link 1 monster with a downward pointing arrow. In combo decks, that is huge. That gives you a huge advantage. It puts a Link monster on the board, and that downward pointing arrow can be used immediately with your other combos, unlike something like Prankertops, where yes, it's good, and yes, it can attack and remove a card and then destroy a card, but it doesn't give you that Link monster that could be a pretty big deal depending on the rest of your hand. Next up, we have Heavy Storm Duster, and this card is pretty much specifically for if you're playing a slower control deck against another slower control deck. And that does sound specific, but there are a lot of slow control decks running around right now. I've already mentioned several of them in this video, and those matchups aren't really about tempo, they're not really about power, they're usually about value. This card says target up to 2 spells/traps on the field, destroy them, you cannot conduct your battle phase, the turn you activate this card. Now that part doesn't come up too much because you're trying to use this card on your opponent's turn, especially in the end phase, but overall it's just a very easy +1 to get against those back row decks. Obviously it's not as impactful as Red Reboot, but if you're also playing a slower deck, you're probably not going to be playing that card. And while Evenly Match is very good going second, this card is actually good going first or second and is almost an auto win if you open multiple copies going first in those slower matchups. Anyway though, that is all the cards that I wanted to talk about in today's video. Make sure to watch out for these if you're going to events this weekend. Maybe you'll want to play them yourself, or maybe you just want to know that they exist so you know how to play around them. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to buy any of these cards, make sure to use the link in the description below because that does support the channel. I'll see you later though. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.